this webinar. Before I start off, I would like to request every participant here to please mute your mics and unmute it only when you want to speak or you want to ask some questions. Other than that, I would please request you to keep your mics muted, as it creates disturbances if your mics are not muted. Also, by the end of the webinar, we will be having question round. So for that, if you have any questions for the speaker, or also even for the organization or the organizers, I would like to request all the participants to please make use of the chat section and leave your comments or your questions or queries in the chat box that will be there in your screen. So my name is Rongsen Ben Longkomer. I'm currently in Nagaland, in Dimapur, Nagaland. I've been with FBS for almost 1.5 years, and I will be moderating the webinar for today. Before we go into listening to what the resource person has prepared for all of us today, I would like to just give all of you a brief introduction on community conserved areas and why we are doing this webinars, and our roles in CCA management in Northeast India. So as we all know that Northeast region of India has been blessed immensely with large scale of forests and massive scales of natural resources. And that is something that the communities in Northeast have always been trying to sustainably utilize and trying to conserve for many years now. We also know that most of the lands are governed by the communities themselves, and also they're conserved by the communities and also governed by the communities themselves. And these are the areas that we refer to as the community conserved areas in order to protect the rich biodiversity and natural resources. This, the term community conserved areas, CCAs, can be, it's a universal term that can be used in different kinds of conserved areas all over the world. It can range from landscapes like forests, mountains, and then waterscapes like the rivers, the rivers that are being conserved by the communities. So these are some of the types of CCAs that can be found all over the world. And Northeast India itself, we have a significant number of CCAs, mainly focusing on a lot of forest areas, as we are mostly covered by forest cover. So apart from that, CCAs also serve as a reservoir for rich biodiversity, and it includes a lot of threatened and endangered species within these CCAs, and it can be categorized into two types: landscapes, as I've said, and also waterscapes. CCAs also provide to be the source of sustainable livelihood for the communities that are associated with these CCAs, and so it makes such community-led conservation efforts to be recognized. So it needs, some sort of a recognition by the efforts that are being made by the communities. It needs a certain sort of recognition, and so in this context, Foundation for Ecological Security, FES, have been working in the Northeast since 2011, and we have been assisting and supporting the communities in strengthening the governance and management systems of the community conserved areas. Although we have our presence in the other states of Northeast as well, we have been working with Nagaland with almost more than 70 CCAs, and we have been actively participating and assisting the CCA committees in designing long-term CCA management plans, conservation of species management plans, and also certain projects like conservation of 4 endangered species, which is under the Habitats Trust. So those are some of the activities that we have been, you know, assisting the communities with. And other than that, we also do mapping of the CCA boundaries and biodiversity assessment. So these are some of the activities that we have been doing so far. However, in the wake of the pandemic, COVID-19, our outreach towards our CCAs and other places have been restricted. So we are unable to reach out to the places that we have been working with, the communities that we have been working with. But then, because of advancement in technology, we are able to reach out and conduct these seminars, these webinars. So these webinars have been conducted. For a series of webinars have been conducted, and then here we try to celebrate the conservation efforts made by the communities by inviting our hardworking and dedicated conservationists and the representatives from the CCA committees and the forums to share their experiences and also their journey with in the field of conservation. We also, like today, we also bring, experts, people who have worked in the field of conservation, in different kinds of conservation field, like in the conservation of forests, conservation of endangered species. So we bring together these people in one platform so that they can share their experiences and also come together to discuss on certain things that can benefit the communities as well. For this, we have been very blessed that we have our partners like NEPET from Nagaland, and also we have the Habitats Trust and NCCF, which is the Nagaland CCA Forum. So these are some of the partners that we have been blessed with, and we are always grateful to all of them for their participation and also supporting us in our webinars and all the other related activities. So this is a little bit about the webinar series that we've been taking. On the screen, you can see the series that was held the last webinar that was held, and it was a really productive one. I hope, and I believe that today will also be another productive webinar. So coming back to today's webinar session, that is on the community conserved areas, an approach for inclusive conservation in Northeast India. So today we have Dr. Pijush Kumar Dutta, who is a conservation ecologist who has over more than 2 decades of experience working in several programs and projects related to biodiversity research, community-led biodiversity conservations, community conserved areas, especially in the Western Arunachal Pradesh. And many more. He has done, significant amount of work in the field of conservation, which he will be speaking with us through the experiences and the examples that will be drawn from his study and his findings. Currently, he is with WWF India and is based in Guwahati, and he's leading community engagement in wildlife and habitat division. So he also served as an assistant professor at Tata Institute of Social Sciences in Guwahati, and he taught ecology and environment and sustainable development. And his PhD is on tree structure, regeneration, and community dependence on timberline forests of Arunachal Pradesh from Assam University. So he has also written and co-authored a lot of research papers and a lot of research work and articles on ecology and biodiversity, community-led biodiversity conservation, and many more. So with his decade-long experience working with closely with the community conserved areas, especially in Arunachal Pradesh, today he will be talking about the significance of these CCAs and the importance of an inclusive approach, for conservation in Northeast India, and also he will be speaking about the policies that surrounds, community conservation in northeastern states. and the challenges that we face, and in order for recognition, and also uh, he will also give pointers on the way forward, suggestions that he has come up with after his many years of studies and involvement with the community and in the field of conservation. So he will be further talking about this in his presentation. So I will not take too much time, giving his introduction. I do hope that we will all have an enriching experience through this webinar. And yes, I would like to give time to Dr. Pijush. If you're online, the time is all yours now.
Yeah, thank you, Ansuman, for this nice introduction or setting the background very correctly. So let me start sharing my screen. Yeah, and thank you everybody for taking out the time for these discussions today. So basically what I'll be sharing with all of you is, as Ansuman was telling, that it's basically the learning that I had so far from the field uh, uh, while working in Arunachal Pradesh and since 2001 basically. So now to straight away go to the presentations. Yeah. Now just to set the background, like when we talk about conservation at present day, what we understand is mostly the protected area model of conservation. But if you look at how it has came into existence, it was basically in 1972 when the first national park was.
Use the. Can you make it full screen? The presentations.
It is full screen.
Yeah,
Okay?
it's not a full screen actually.
Here it is showing full screen.
Yeah.
Is it not showing full screen?
It's not yet actually. You can see all the slide actually. Anyway.
Someone is speaking constantly in the background. Can please everyone mute
Yeah,
their microphone?
let me unmute them actually. Can you request the other participant to please mute your mic so that we can peacefully hear the speaker presentation?
Hello?
Yeah. Pijush, go ahead.
Can you see it now?
Yeah, we can see it, but can you fully make it full screen so that we can see?
Yeah.
We can see your presentation. Yes, look like it's not coming. Yeah, it's support.
It's now there?
Okay, I think yes. Okay, you can go ahead actually, sir.
Okay. So basically, if you look at how this whole protected area model of conservation has came into existence, it was basically in 1872 when the first national park was notified in USA, the Yellowstone National Park. And at present, there are around 10% of Earth's surface which is covered under the protected area network. But if you look at in the ground, what is the real situation? So traditional indigenous communities, around 22% of the world land is under their control. And this is the area where actually 80% of the planet's biodiversity is found. And 11% of the world forests that are legally owned by the local indigenous communities across the world. And it is also true that 85% of the protected areas globally has certain numbers of indigenous community settlement inside it. So it is not a foolproof kind of a protection model that we are talking about, the protected area model of conservation. So we know there are certain kind of controversies or kind of gaps which is there when we talk about the protected area model of conservation. So now if you look at the Indian context, basically at present we have around 870 notified national parks, wildlife sanctuaries, conservation reserves, community reserves across India, which is covering around 5.2% of the total geographical area of the country. And this is basically, again, if you look at the recent Forest Survey of India data, we have around 21.5% of area of India under forest cover. So if you have 5% area under the protected area network, that means still there are lots of biodiversity rich area which is outside protected area and which needs to be taken care of as quickly as possible, because things are not in a very good shape at this point of a time. Now, as we have discussed that protected area, first thing that come to our mind when we talk about conservation is the protected area. So, but we all know that there is some kind of an apprehensions vary among the communities when you talk about the protected area model of conservation. So what are the reasons behind that? So one of the reasons is basically the communities in and around the protected area who are settled in and around the protected area are forced to pay high cost of conservation success. Now we take a pride of the success that we have in Kaziranga, the success that we have in Kanha, the success that we have in Corbett. But who is paying the cost? Whose livestock are being killed by the wildlife that comes out of this protected area when the number of the wildlife starts increasing over their area? Whose crops get damaged by this wildlife? Whose houses are being damaged by the wildlife? So it is the community who are in and around this protected area. So a conservation model where someone is paying the cost and someone is enjoying the benefit, it cannot be a very, very long sustainable model of conservation. So there is something wrong in that model of conservation. Then the feeling of alienations among the community. If you look at the way the protected areas are being managed, it is mostly managed by the forest department. The community who has been there for centuries, for generations after generations, they are not taken into, they are not provided any space for consultations, discussions in all management related issues that is taken there. So there is a feeling of alienations among the community. Then obviously being a protected area or area near to the protected area, there are limited options for livelihood also that is available with the communities there. So these are some of the gaps, or these are some of the limitations of protected area, because of which whenever we talk about to have a new protected area, new wildlife sanctuaries, we normally find community are not very much in favor of that. Now, if you look at the Northeast, which I'll be focusing much more on, mostly on. So globally, we know that there are 36 biodiversity hotspots, and in India, India actually contribute a lot to the 3 biodiversity hotspots that we have. Out of these 3, 2 biodiversity hotspots, that's the Indo-Burma and the Himalaya, actually covers whole of the northeastern states. And now let me also tell that when I'm talking about northeastern states, I'm actually not including Sikkim at this point of a time. Yeah, so so we know that though Sikkim is also part of the Himalaya biodiversity hotspot. So Northeast is as a whole is the part of the 2 important biodiversity hotspots this globally is identified. But to have a biodiversity hotspots is not something that is to celebrate, because we know that there are 2 criteria based on which biodiversity hotspots are identified. One is that the area must have more than 1,500 endemic vascular plants, which is the indication of the richness or conservation value of that area. But second is, it also means that it has lost 70% of its original habitat. So to have 2 biodiversity hotspots covering Northeast in India is not something just to celebrate. Yeah, we have a very rich biodiversity in our area, but this biodiversity is also under serious threat because we have already lost 70% of our original habitat that was here. So now if you look at the conservation significance of Northeast, the 7 states, we know that the forest cover of the Northeast is very, very high. Yeah, so highest you get in Mizoram, which is 85% of the total geographical area, and minimum is in Assam, which is 36%. Well, across India, it is 22% only. So you have states like, So you have states like Arunachal and Mizoram, where you have 80% of the area under green cover, forest cover. But also the uniqueness of Northeast is that majority of this, maximum of this forest area that we have in these regions is under unclassed state forest category, which de facto means is under the traditional ownerships and control of the local indigenous community. So if you look at Northeast, around 58% of the total forest, which actually contribute or it constitutes 14% of the total forest cover of India, is under the traditional control and ownership of the local community. So this is a unique opportunity that we have in Northeast, which you'll not find in many other states across India. But what is happening to this forest? If you look at the recent FSI report, we are losing out this forest very, very fast. The states where more forests are with the community are also one which is losing out forests much at a higher rate compared to the other states. So Northeast is also known to be this area where from we are losing forests very, very at a higher rate compared to the other parts of the states. So we have an opportunity that where community has a huge kind of an authority or kind of an a capability of to decide about how to manage and how to conserve the forest area. But in the other sides, there are serious threats, which is also we can see because of which we are losing our forest. So as we have seen, the protected area has lots of limitations. It has lots of limitations, and in the Northeast context, basically probably what is the best way out is for us is to look for community-based conservations rather than just the protected area model of conservations. And this particular model of conservation is not something that we are talking in India or in Northeast only. This is something is now globally recognized. The community, by isolating community, by alienating community, you cannot have a very successful conservation model. You need to make sure that communities' interests are taken care of. They are not deprived when a conservation initiative is taken in any part of the area. And this is very much which has been mentioned in CBD, and India is the signatory of the CBD. So India is committed to ensure a conservation model where community interest is also taken care of. And I think the Northeast is the one region that we have in India which can help India to meet this commitment at the global platform. There is no other states in India which can actually help India to meet this commitment to the CBD. If you look at the Indian policies that we have, which has some space for supporting this community-based conservations, in Indian Forest Act, which is one of the oldest act that we have the provisions for village forests. Recently, in the amendment in 2002, amendment in Wildlife Protection Act, community reserve, one more category was introduced to this. We have a Biological Diversity Act, which is of 2002. Then we have the FRA of 2006. But if you look at little bit in depth, the way these provisions have been narrated or have been explained in these acts, you'll find that this is not talking much about the way community can really contribute in conservation of the resources. It is mostly talks about ensuring the rights, both ownership and user rights of the community. It's not about using the capacity or mobilizing the community to achieve a bigger conservation goal. Yeah, so we are of opinion that if we want to achieve the conservation goal, it's only the protected area model that can achieve it. It's not something that community can really do much to achieve our conservation goal, which I think is a very, very problematic when you talk about community-based conservations in Northeast context also. So basically, we are losing out the opportunity to, if we look at all these policies, that how we can have an inclusive conservation model which can take care of both conservation of biodiversity as well as the socioeconomic development of local communities. So there is a huge potential in Northeast where we can demonstrate that how we can have an inclusive conservation model where community can really take a lead, not only in achieving conservation objective, but also using the conservation as a tool for their socioeconomic overall development. So now when you talk about the community-based, what kind of community-based conservations really we're talking about? So normally when you see also the way the community-based conservations discussions goes on, we see that it is mostly an isolated kind of an initiatives of community which we are talking about. It may be a community somewhere protecting one single species, community somewhere protecting sacred groups, community somewhere protecting some square kilometer of forest. It has its own value. It's not that these are not important. This is very, very important. But what I feel from my all the understandings and learnings through all these years, that actually our community can do much more better. They can scale up, they can go to a next level of engagement or contributions where they can really contribute in achieving the state, national and international conservation target. They can take care of the habitat contiguity, so that these are not isolated small pocket of or patches of forest that community is conserving in isolations, which doesn't provide a proper habitat for any wildlife because these are fragmented in nature. So community can also take care of the quality of the habitats which they are preserving. They can also take care of connectivity of diverse ecosystem along the altitudinal gradient, because Northeast is a mountainous terrain. So along the altitudes, you find different types of ecosystems which are connected to each other. Yeah, so it can also play important role in securing the connectivity between the important wildlife area. It can also contribute highly in recovery or conservations of rare and threatened wildlife that we have in our regions. It can do much more better, or it can achieve much more higher conservation objectives than what we have been able to achieve so far. So there is a huge opportunity for that in if we look at our Northeast context. And by doing this kind of or by mobilizing community to achieve this level of conservation goal, it's not that it will just contribute to the conservations, but it will also contribute in maximizing the economic benefit the community can have from this conservation initiative. Because whenever you talk about any sustainable harvesting protocols, when you try to apply any sustainable harvesting protocols, either in which you normally may use the rotation policies like of space or species. Yeah, so you need a bigger space to really execute that sustainable management collection protocols. When you talk about marketing, a profitable marketing can only be done when you have a huge quantity or large quantity of produce that you are collecting from the forest in a sustainable way. So if you are doing it in a smaller area, in a small space, it's not only you are losing out your opportunity to contribute to the global goal, a conservation goal, but you are also are kind of limiting the kind of the benefit, economic benefit that you can have through your conservation initiatives. And also when you have a bigger area, bigger number of community coming together, so that collective community effort for conservation is very, very strong, can come up very, very strongly to override the vested individual influences. We know in Northeast, most of the threats that we are facing is very much internal. We have some individuals with vested interest who are imposing their interest and their greed on the larger community. So when community can, if we can bring together a larger group of people in one place for one objective, they can really stand against those individuals very, very effectively, rather than when they are functioning in isolations and in small groups. And when this model will demonstrate that this is not only can help in community to kind of maintain their socioeconomic development, but is also contributing to the global conservation targets or international national conservation targets, it automatically will help in generating global support, which is very, very important for sustenance of any such community initiatives that happens in the ground. So this is one thing, it's a big opportunity that we have in Northeast, and I personally feel that we are missing it largely. Maybe it's a time just we start looking at how we can really move to these directions. So now, as I have been telling that in Northeast, we have a scope to really think big. Yeah, we can think much bigger, not in a small patches of areas managed by the community. So it's not, there are various ways we can do. It's not, it can be a single unit of CCA, this community conserved area, which is the common terminology that we use for any such area which are managed by the community. So it can be a single unit of CCA, which is bigger and a contiguous area managed by one village, or it can be cluster of multiple CCAs which are interconnected with each other and are being managed by multiple adjoining villages. So both approaches is possible. Both approaches is possible. But our target will be to have a bigger area under the community conservation initiatives, not small isolated patches of area. So we can achieve both depending on what is the ground situations we are working with. We can try both the models, and we tried it in Arunachal Pradesh and it's worked. I'll share that later. So now policies, if you look at the Northeast, what are the policy opportunity that we have to really support this community-based conservations? We know that during the British rules, they followed a policy of non-interference. So because in the Northeast, we have a very unique governance systems of our indigenous communities. So they never bothered much to interfere into what is happening in Northeast. Even in after independence, there were special provisions were incorporated in constitutions of India to safeguard this unique kind of an governance systems or the relations of the community with their surroundings, to safeguard that their unique certain important provisions were incorporated in the constitutions of India. One of it is the Sikh Schedule, which is applicable in parts of Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Tripura. And if you look at in the Sikh Schedule under section 3, it is specifically mentioned the district council or regional council can frame their own law for managing forest, which is outside the notified reserve forest. Is clause 3.1, section B. So this is, the space is there in the Sikh Schedule provisions, but for some reasons, we have never used it. Once we have got the autonomy, we copy-pasted our Wildlife Protection Act, we copy-pasted our Forest Conservation Act, but we have not used this opportunity which is there, which the constitutions actually has provided us. For some reasons, I'm not very sure about it. If you look at Nagaland, there is a 371A, where village councils are giving very kind of an important power to decide about lots of issues, including the management of forest and natural resources. In Arunachal Pradesh, you have 371H. In Manipur, there is 371C. So basically, there are space in the existing policies, but unfortunately, we have not used it to its full potentials. So we have now been discussing with Karbi Anglong Autonomous Council, and we have got a very positive kind of an feedback from them. And we are trying to find out a way how we can have a rules to support and manage a CCS by using the section 3 of the Sikh Schedule. So it's a work in progress, and I'm hopeful that probably something good will come up. Things has got a little bit of in the back burner because of this pandemic, but things are moving in a positive direction so far I could make out during the discussions with everyone there. So now, if we have a bit of, I think, consensus that the community-based conservation is the future for the Northeast to secure not only to secure the biodiversity of this area, but also for the socioeconomic development of the community. But it's much easier to say than to do in the ground. So there are fundamental challenges when you really try to work for the community-based conservations. First, how you define the community. It's now in a globalized world, the communities are not in an isolated group of people sitting somewhere. So it's a mixture of community now. So it's a diverse group of people now with a diverse interest, with a diverse aspirations. So defining a community is one of the challenges that we normally find. That when you talk about engaging community for conservation, who are the people you are talking about engaging? So this is the first challenge that you will come across, we all come across when you talk about community-based conservation. Second is conservation. What is conservation? So there is a whole debate. If to have 100 tigers is good conservation, or we should have 150 tigers to say that it's a good conservation. If we have 30% forest is a good conservation, so we should have 80% forest to say we are doing a good conservation. So there is a whole kind of an debate that what is a good conservation, what is the ultimate conservation that we want to achieve. So there is a whole So then when you are talking about community and conservation, it means you are academically, you are trying to bring in two disciplines, ecology and social science together. Yes, and these two disciplines is complicated in itself. Yeah, because it is a multi-layered. If you look at the society, it's highly complex. Yeah, it's similarly the ecology, it's a highly complex ecosystems you are dealing with. So it is not an easy, just to warn that, yeah, it's very good to say that we need to work for community-based conservation, but we, as a practitioners of the field, we should be kind of aware about the challenges that will come across when we really start executing this community-based conservation in the ground. Then community is also changing very fast. Yeah, so communities are no more dependent on subsistence life form. They are mostly dependent. They are driven by the markets nowadays. There is this erosion of the traditional value systems and management systems that we have, that we used to have in our society. Yeah, so normally what I have experienced in Arunachal Pradesh, and which is applicable, I think, across many of the areas, is that our traditional knowledge systems, though it is eroding, it was very good. But if you look at the traditional management systems, for some regions, this is not evolving with time. So in the most of the traditional management system, you'll find the rules and regulations, which was framed long back, keeping in mind the kind of challenges and threats that was there. But it has not evolved with time. And so now most of these traditional management systems are no more effective in addressing emerging challenges like illegal wildlife trade, garbage, pollution, climate change. There are multiple new emerging challenges that are coming up. But unfortunately, our management system, as it has not evolved with time, it is no more in a position to really address these emerging threats. Then now people have access to new technologies. It's not that what you go and tell the people they will just believe you. Yeah, so they have access to the technology to cross-verify, to decide about what is good for them, what is bad for them. So you need to be very careful about that also. Yeah, so then there is a huge influence of politics in the market, on the society now. So these are the emerging challenges. These are the new kind of challenges that everybody come across when we are in the field. So how to engage with community-based conservation? One of the biggest mistakes normally we as a conservation organization do is that we try to impose our conservation objective on community. Our objective is to kind of protect or secure a rare and threatened wildlife. Yeah. So, and we try to impose that on the community. But remember that community has its own conservation objective. It may be based on mostly utility value of the resources, but it has or cultural value of the resources. But community has a different objective of conservation that we normally don't try to understand, and we try to impose our objective on them. So the first thing that is for us to learn is that how to bring in a convergence between our objective of conservation and community's objective of conservation. If there is no convergence happening in the ground, this is not going to sustain for a long. There will be no acceptance from the community to whatever we are trying to do. Also, you need to remember the traditional conservation practices were mostly evolved to maximize and allocate the harvest, not to conserve the supplies. So if you look at the whole way the shifting cultivation used to be done, it's about allocating. I've seen in Nagaland the way the areas are allocated annually to the villagers, and then the cycle is maintained. Yeah, 10-12 cycle is maintained for the zooming. So it's more about most of the rules and regulations you find related to the natural resource management was on allocating the resources rather than conserving the resources. And also there is a kind of an shift. If you look at the way communities' relations with the ecology that used to be there, it is now more of an economic driven. They have moved towards the market now. Yeah, so these are the kind of a real fact in the ground. And as I have told, that these traditional management systems are in many places has become very weak or redundant to address the emerging threats and challenges, which needs to be taken care of. So with this background, I will just take you through quickly whatever little bit of work that we have done in Arunachal Pradesh, which is the Western Arunachal part of West Kameng and Tawang districts of Arunachal Pradesh. And let me tell you, this is a work in progress. It is not just something that we can say that it is a big success that we have achieved. And there are many reasons, and there's a long way to go to say that this is a success. So basically, this is the one of the landscapes that we work at the WWF. We have 9 landscapes across India. So Western Arunachal landscape is one of the landscape that where we are working, WWF India particularly. So this is an area. It has a huge biodiversity. So there, if you talk about the plants, it's a really it's a gold mine. Yeah. So if you talk about wildlife, most of us know that this is the area from where this Tawang macaque was discovered, which is a new to science after many decades actually. Yeah. You have talked about the red panda. You talk about many of the threatened species which are listed in IUCNs. These are there in this landscape. There are 5 important bird area, which it itself talks about what is the biodiversity status in that area. You have the black-necked crane, which is one of the very important migratory species that comes to India. Then there is a huge repository of high altitude wetlands, which is acting as a reservoir for the tributaries, which is coming from Arunachal Pradesh and contributing to the Brahmaputra. And there are also some of these wetlands which are contributing to the transboundary river like Manas, because the water is going to Manas first, then is coming back to India, going to Bhutan first, then coming back to India. So in terms of biodiversity, this is really a gold mine. Yeah, this is a really a gold mine. And interestingly, all these areas are under de facto control of the local communities. There is no protected area. I'm not talking about the foothills where you have the eagle nest and other, but if you go a little bit beyond in the west coming, then completely town, there is no protected area. So these are all these areas, this rich biodiversity area is under traditional control of the local community. So we started this community-based conservation model. I think it will be a little bit smaller in the front for everybody to look at, but I'll just explain that what are the basic steps that we follow when we start, we try to kind of an
What happened? Hello?
Hello. I think his network is disconnected, or
Piyush, can you hear us? I think there is some problem with the Piyush network. Bino or Tapas, can you?
someone call?
Yeah. I think there must be some problem with his network connection actually.
Sorry for the inconvenience. We will confirm about his status of his network, and we will get back to the presentation after we confirm his status. Please be patient and bear with us. Okay, so the speaker is going to reconnect now. So I would like all of you to please wait patiently as he is facing some sort of network connectivity problem.
Sorry, it got disconnected. I'm extremely sorry for that. Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, you can hear you, sir.
Yeah, sorry for the
no problem, sir. No problem. You can understand.
I'm just sharing the screen. It is saying is hosted disable screen sharing. Can you just?
Yeah, just a minute. Binoy, can you make Pijush the co-host? Just a minute, sir.
Yeah.
Yeah, Pijush, you are the co-host now. You can go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Is it visible now?
Yeah, it's visible, Pijush. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, if I talk about the certain steps that we have followed for the CCA model to promote the CCA model of conservation in Western Arunachal Pradesh, the first was the demarcation and notification of the CCA. So there were certain steps which was followed. Basically, series of consultations were carried out with the villagers to get their consent, to know what they think about it, and which are the area that can be actually they can keep aside for as a CCA. So all those things, these discussions were done initially with the community. Then after everybody agreed in the meetings with the community, then the whole resolutions and notification was drafted. Now this resolution and notification was issued by the village panchayat. So here the CCA management committee has been constituted by the villagers, which actually look after the whole management and livelihood objective of the CCA. But this management committee is being constituted by the village panchayats, and the notification of the CCA that this particular area the villagers has decided to now from now onwards manage in CCA, and the CCA management committee with these members are being assigned the responsibility to look after the CCA is actually is done by the village panchayat. So because the village panchayat is something a legal entity which is there in the village itself. Then once the CCA notification is done so lots of discussions that with the community, then comes the first objective, the conservation objectives. So in this case, the first thing that we did is to do a baseline survey, socioeconomic baseline survey of the village to understand what are the kind of dependency of the community on the forest resources is there, what amount of the resources they need, what are the traditional knowledge systems they had or management practices they used to have, and what are the major concerns they have. So all these things are documented through the village level surveys that is being conducted. Then we go for the biodiversity surveys in the CCS, where basically we document the biodiversity stocks which are available over there, then the status of the resources on which the community is dependent, which are the resources, where it is found, how much it is available. So those assessments are being done. Then we also try to look at if there is a human-wildlife conflict issues in that area. After you have the socioeconomic data in place, then the ecological data in place, then we start working on the management plan. Yeah, so that's now the management plan, what we have thought, we have not yet been able to finalize any of the management plan because it's a complex process. So we thought of to have a 5 component in this management plan. One will be basically to ensure the sustainable collection of resources on which the villagers are dependent for subsistence purpose, like say for firewood, fodder, for grazing. So which is there, it's not for commercial, it's for their own consumptions. The second is the resources which are there, which can be collected for commercial purposes. The third is for the conservation of important species and some of the critical habitat which is within the CCA. The fourth is restoration of the degraded areas which are found within the CCA. And fifth is to manage human-wildlife conflict, how to manage human-wildlife conflict if it is there in that particular CCA. if you talk about the second objective, this livelihood part, so obviously it was very clear from the beginning that the livelihood has to be strongly linked with the conservations. Yeah, so we started with two basically. One is the community-based tourism, because this is one livelihood where the community earn by showing the wildlife which is there in their CCA. Yeah, the natural resources which is in their CCA. So there is a direct link the community can see from their conservations in the earning they are having from the visiting tourists. Then there are lots of rich stock of NTFTs in our forest in Northeast. Now there is a need to kind of find out a way to do an assessment and how much can be extracted in a sustainable manner. Then there are also some farm-based activity or local handicrafts, all those kind of. So we did do a feasibility study to find out what is the best possible things that can be done over there. And accordingly, we start executing it. If I talk about what we have been doing so far, this is the three things we have been able to do very, very effectively. Yeah, so far. And these are the things where I'll say the work is in progress. We have not been able to achieve as we have desired, but things are still in progress and lot more is required to be done. Now, if you look at this point of a time, we have around 8 CCS, which is covering around 1,200, more than 1,200 square kilometer area from West Kameng and Tawang. Now the cluster thing, which I mentioned initially, if you remember, the two options, you can have a single unit CCA or you can have a cluster approach for the CCA. You can see that this one CCA, which is the bigger one, the Thembang one, is one which is basically 635 square kilometer. But if you look at the CCS here, there are a cluster of 3 CCS here in Jimithang. Also, there are a cluster of 3 CCS, which are basically contributing together 223 square kilometers and 291 square kilometers. So this is something we tried in the ground. It worked well. That you may not be able to bring all of them together in one platform under one institutions. They may like to work separately, but there is a scope still to bring them together in a cluster form. And this is something also we can try in other areas also. So these are some of the photographic documentations, like community consultations that we had, the notification process that we had in the CCS. Then these are the whole biodiversity that we survey that we conducted along with the villagers in the CCS after that was demarcated and notified. Then these are the livelihood interventions that we did for the community-based tourism, where we did initially the capacity building. Then we tried to help them to build, have some basic infrastructure which is required to run the community-based tourism, like homestays, trekking camping material, or community village campsites. And they started receiving tourists also in the villages. Then there was one pilot that we did in Mandla Fudung, where basically we tried to explore how we can use this Janthozylum, one of the NTFT which is found within the CCA, to provide the economic incentive for the community over there. So initially the assessment was done, how much is available, where it is available. Then based on certain fair wild criteria, we tried to find out how much can be extracted. And then there was a tie-up with the Dabur for them to purchase it. So all the individuals who collected it, it was aggregated in one place, and then it was supplied to Dabur. Then in Jimithang also, there was an initiatives to help community to mitigate the conflict with the wildlife, because of which many of them were finding it difficult to continue with their agriculture practices. And if you look at the conservation impact we have been able to achieve so far, like there are patrolling groups, youths in the CCS who periodically go up for patrolling to see if any illegal things is happening over there or not. There is no ban on anything to collect for their self-consumptions, but there is a ban on commercial collections of firewood. Because what we have seen, that the amount of resource they have in their area, if the villagers collect it for their own consumptions, it's never a problem. But when truckload of firewood starts going out of the village, then it's become real problem. So they have intentionally, still the management plan is in place, they put a ban on commercial collection of resources, particularly the forest firewood, because that's a cold place, so there is a huge demand for firewood in that area. And then villagers actually have started taking photographs. This is the one photograph of blackneck crane from Jimithang. I think many of you know the impact of this photograph, because of which this is one of the reasons why the 600 megawatt dam in Nyamjangchu rivers was stopped. So this is one of the finest photograph of a red panda with 2 cubs. It's very difficult to see a red panda, but there were 3 red pandas which was there. These are the Rudy Shelduck. So these are all the photographs which are taken by the local youths. It's not by the WWF team. Yeah, so this is something I find very, very interesting, because now the villagers have started taking pride of the wildlife they have. Earlier, they never used to notice all these wildlife. Now they have started noticing it. They've started recording it, and they started feeling pride of what this unique wildlife they have in their area. So in the tourism, we did a model. I'll not discuss much about it, but there were 2 kind of a component. One component for the villagers to earn the money, and one component for the management committee to generate their corpus. And there was a whole mechanism which was adopted to ensure the benefit sharing among the individuals. So this model is now providing them around 2 lakhs per year in Thambang particularly. They're earning out of it, the villagers. And the community is saving around 50,000 per year on an average in their corpus. So there are lots of challenges. I'm not going to discuss now on this because this is. Then the NTFP that I've talked about, we did in a pilot scale. So 4,000 kg of it was sold to Dabur, and where 119 actually villagers actually was engaged to collect it. And so total earnings for this 119 villagers were 18 lakhs, and 35,000 were deposited in the corpus of the committee, management committee, CCA management committee in that village. So there are, I think, more than 3,000 kg still lying with them because of the COVID, it could not be supplied. So the challenges, if I want to mention some of the broad challenges, I'm not going to the very nitty-gritty now. As I have told in the beginning, there's a lack of recognition of communities' capacity and willingness to work for conservation of natural resources at a bigger scale. We are happy with the small initiatives that they are taking at their own, but there is a whole opportunity that they can really contribute at a much bigger scale if real required support is provided to them. There's a lack of policy support, as I've already talked about. We don't have, the central acts normally don't recognize the unique situations of opportunities that we have in Northeast India, but still we are following only the central act. Without a long-term support for the communities, any community, you'll find them very, very positive to start this kind of initiative. But if there is no continuous support for them to continue this initiative, this will fall apart very, very quickly, because they have their own priority, other priority also to achieve. Now, also, this kind of conservation initiatives can only success when there is a multidisciplinary approach. So I'll talk about what is a multidisciplinary approach in the next slide. But these are some of the challenges we came across while executing the CCA project in Arunachal Pradesh. So way forward, obviously there is an urgent need for a policy level support, which is very, very important in Northeast context. That has to be specific to the Northeast context. And as I have told, it's a multidisciplinary approach is required. You need good social scientists in the CCA work who can facilitate the community mobilization, development of the institutional mechanism, understanding community attitude and perceptions. You need good ecologists, wildlife scientists who can help the community in documenting their biodiversity, developing their management plan, developing sustainable harvesting protocols. So you need that kind of, you need good expert who in the field of business and marketing for planning and marketing of those NTFPs or promotion of the CBTs. So it's not something that one NGO, one group of people, one set of community can do everything. If you really want CCA, if you want to see CCA at that scale and achieving that level of success, you need a multidisciplinary approach. And this multidisciplinary approach, I'm not talking about expert coming and imposing their ideas, their understanding on community. Their role will be to facilitate the process, taking community along with them. It's not expert going and telling community what to do and not to do. It's basically facilitating the process by taking community along with them. Then there is a need for synergy and convergence with the government program of community development. There are multiple programs we have. Yesterday only I was hearing one talk on the farmers producer organizations. This is the interesting options that we have for marketing the NTFPs, for marketing the farm produce on a cluster level. Yeah, so we need to use these opportunities which are not in the conservation department who is working for the conservation. There are many other departments who are working for the community. We can pick up some of these programs and fit into as per the requirement in the ground. Then there's a long-term financial support is required for the community. Otherwise, you can have as many number of CCA you want, because community will never deny that they don't want to protect their area, but you will never get into a positions where community are actually successfully, effectively managing those CCAs. And if you really want the community to achieve that, get to that stage and sustain it for a longer duration, you need a continuous financial support, committed financial support for the community institutions. Otherwise, it will be just a beginning, but it will end abruptly. Yeah, so I think this is what I had with me to share with all of you. So I'm open for any questions that you have.
Thank you, sir, for your very comprehensive presentation, and it was really insightful. And I believe that every participant here has learned something new through your experiences. I think it's very important that what he said about a model of conservation that has high cost on communities. It's not a successful model. And I believe that a lot of people here, think the same, because by alienating the community in a conservation model, it's something that projects or a lot of models have been adopting till date without knowing the context of that very area or that very communities. So yes, that is also the key takeaway from this this whole presentation. And also it is very important that like sir has mentioned, that identifying our rights and our what the Constitution has in store for us and what the Constitution has provided to us, it is very important that we identify it as a community. And also I believe that a lot of CCA representatives are here today, so that is one of the very important key takeaways from this presentation that sir has given to us. So I will not take up much time. We have some questions already in the chat section, so we will straight away go to the chats, to the questions. You can still drop in your messages, your questions. So the first question is from Dr. Ngasepam Roman Singh. He says, good evening. What is the basic criteria for being a CCA? So I think he means to ask the basic criteria of a CCA, to how to recognize a CCA. So this question, I think sir can also take it up.
Yeah, so basically the first criteria is obviously the willingness of the community. There has to be the willingness among the community. And if you talk from the biodiversity point of view, I think every inch in the Northeast has some or other biodiversity value. Yeah, so then it comes, who are the community who are really interested? And then obviously for us, the criteria is to how we can have a bigger area which the community can really manage as a CCA. Either so wherever the villages, we see that if they have a big area which they want to really secure for the CCA, that we normally prefer. Or if they don't have much bigger area, but there are other village adjoining to them, who then we try to get them also in the board. That okay, let's all of us come together and start working on the CCA model, so that together we can achieve a bigger area or secure a bigger area for the CCA. And obviously there has to be a traditional ownership over it. So we normally don't go in Arunachal, that situation has still not came up. Like we don't try to kind of an overlap it with the notified protected area. Then you get into a different legal kind of an issue over there. So normally, which are traditionally under the ownership of the community, we go for that.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. If anyone has, before I go to the next question that is there in the chat box, if anyone has a direct question that he or she wants to ask, you can mute and you can unmute your mic and you can ask the question directly.
Hello. I'm audible. I'm Arun. Yeah,
Yes.
I'm Arun Dikshit. I'm calling from Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Uh, my question, two questions basically. I just wanted to understand when you say there are two set of people, that one side is the community and other side is the science-based conservation agencies, and we need to converge the visions of these two different vision people group. You have to converge the things. What else? What is your experience? Where are these gaps between these two visions is maximum, and where we have to really reconcile the the CCA concept? We need to incorporate this conservation practices in these CCAs, while reconciling these two different visions basically. That's one question. Second question is while you are describing the basically the earlier question was trying to ask that what is the vision, what are the objectives where the maximum debates were happening while you are describing the uh, CCAs basically, or creating the management plan or something like that. So that's the first question. Second is the question I was trying to ask is particularly in Tawang. I knew I had visited the Tawang and I worked for some time in Tawang, uh, where there is a concept of sacred groups also. And the CCAs and sacred groups are somewhere it merge. But in Jilitang and other areas where you have suggested that there are three or four different CCAs are very close and very large CCAs are there. But then there are certain sacred groups which are very small groups, smaller areas, but may not be like that kind of a 300 square kilometer area. So whether you are also bringing some kind of a program with the Arunachal, the Tawang people particularly, where we have this sacred groups also to be included as part of this. These are basically two questions.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, the convergence part, what you have asked for, it's not that easy actually, frankly speaking, that and normally like way we as a conservation agency or organizations work, or a conservation scientists work, we try to, it's a very normal, like we try to impose our objective of conservation. Like we prioritize that this is a IUCN listed critically endangered, so it's a top priority for us to secure it. It's a Schedule 1 species in the Wildlife Protection Act, so we want to protect it. But if you talk with the community, they have a different, completely different objective of conservation. So normally what happens that if the convergence comes in when they see, or they agree that while achieving the conservation objective that we are talking about, the critically and securing the critically endangered species, it will not cause any harm to them, or rather it will bring more benefit for them, or some kind of a benefit for them. Like say for example, if I talk about the Karbi Anglong that we have been discussing at this point of the time. So when we started discussing with them, we found that they told us that there were lots of forest resources which they want for their traditional rituals and cultural practices, which they are finding it very difficult to get now. So the whole idea of CCA in Karbi Anglong was not for conservation of elephant or something. It was to secure the resources, which is very, very important for their cultural practices. So now once the forest is there, where these all resources which are required for their cultural practices is available and secure, it will automatically provide the habitat for some of the wildlife which we are concerned about. So we don't have to go and tell community that we are here primarily for conservation of elephant. Yeah, it can be other way around. Our elephant conservations can be a kind of an what to say, something that we achieve as a byproduct of what is the priority of the conservation objective the community has. So this is challenging, no doubt, but that's the only way. Otherwise, community it will be least interested to really give their time and put their effort for what we want to achieve as a conservation scientist or a biologist. And second was, sorry, I missed the second one. Sacred group, yeah.
Sacred group.
Sacred group. So say for example, we have not in Tawang, we have worked with the wetland as a sacred area, sacred wetlands. So the whole approach was that we didn't talk about the single water body which is there, because we know that the catchment area of the water body is also important. So when we talk about the CCA, so the wetland is in the center, but surrounding area of this wetland is also being brought under the CCA. So that and the villagers understand it very, very nicely, that yeah, it's not enough just to make sure that the water body is not disturbed. It is also important to make sure that the watershed area, the catchment area of the wetland is also kind of taken care of, if you really consider your sacred water body to be preserved. So this is how we try to kind of link what we want to achieve and what they also were looking forward for.
Okay, thank you. Just one small question again, maybe I just wanted to understand. While describing that area, like 200 square kilometer or maybe 50 hectare, whatever area they are delimiting for the management, bring under the CCA kind of a thing. There are two things, like in Nagaland, there are most of the villages I had visited, in many places, they had already defined area like CCA. They called it as a community conservation area. Yeah. Although there is hardly any management and from very, very strict management kind of thing, maybe there are some kind of traditional rules and regulations they are following. But by delineating of these areas are very traditional things. But while you are designing the things, your program is designing the CCAs while you are describing sitting with the community. What are the criteria through which they are actually delineating the area basically? How you arrive to the 200 hectare or 500 hectare areas?
It's completely they decide. No. Yeah, it's completely we leave it to them to decide. Like
what are their major reasons to decide? That's what I wanted to understand. Very technical thing, but maybe.
Yeah, so it's basically the area. There are in Arunachal also the opportunity that the villages have a huge area under their jurisdictions. Yeah, so it's a big areas which are under their jurisdiction. So now once they really get into the concept, they discuss the concept, they normally prefer to have as much as area under their jurisdiction, under the jurisdiction of that particular village within the CCA, because if they demarcate or they put it as a part of the CCA, it's not that there will be ban on anything on them. Only the unsustainable practices which was going on, which they also feel at some point of a time needs to be stopped, but they were a little bit of finding it difficult to find out a way to really stop that. They find that this CCA is something which is going to help them to really prevent those unsustainable practices. But they are not being stopped to get any resources from the area which they have been collecting for their own consumption. So there is no ban. So for them, it's trying to get the whole area, as much as area they are under their jurisdiction, under certain management regime, so that some of those unsustainable practices can be stopped, or some more kind of better economic opportunities can be created. So that's how they took the call.
Thanks. I think I got my answer. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And wonderful presentation. Very wonderful talking here.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the question and also the answer. Before we go to the next person, I would like to just ask one of the questions that is there in the chat box. It's from Sahil. Sahil Nijawan. He says, thank you for the excellent talk, and I wanted to ask if there are challenges of the elite capture. For instance, in Arunachal, political leaders tend to thwart efforts that require community building in favor of contracts for infrastructure projects. What do you do if the local politician decides to bring a PMGYS road scheme through the CCA and promises to give out cash payments to the landowners? He also apologizes if this puts you on the spot, but we've seen this often, and especially in Arunachal Pradesh. That's why.
Yeah, that's true. Like we also had a problem, like when a proposal for dam came up. The hydro projects came up, and there was a huge money which was committed to be rolled out as a compensations to some of the household in the villages. but others were denied because they had the ownership over that. So then there was a compensation because that's a big money for them. Yeah, that's an issue. Obviously, is there. But what I have seen so far, like in Arunachal, in the areas where we have walked, there are main problem is if any defense related project is coming, you cannot deny it. Yeah, so there is a problem that you cannot deny that if some defense establishment is supposed to come up there, so there is a problem to deny it. And there are certain developmental activities which you cannot also deny. And so that's a need of the village. But this whole process, what it has done is help the villagers to find out way to minimize the damages. Yeah, so say for example, in one of the sites where the army was supposed to come up with an establishment, so villagers really had a talk with the army guys that look, this is an area where there is a red panda. So please make sure that you don't harm the red panda. These are the areas where there are trees which the red panda is thriving on. So please make sure that these trees are not, you don't damage those trees. So when these decisions or these development projects comes in, if you have a CCA in that area, then villagers are much more aware, like how to kind of make sure that execution of the development projects cause minimum damage, which probably would have not happened earlier. Uh, 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 that's what I have found in the villages.
Thank you so much again for answering the question. Yarna, sir, do you have anything to say?
Hi, Pijush. This is Yarana from FVS. I have a very small question for you. What do you think how we can do any approach that become like a CC as a conservation approach across the Northeast India? What approach we can follow to become the CC as a approach for the biodiversity conservation across the Northeast?
I think it's a very good beginning in Nagaland, like this whole all the CCA villages who were engaged in the CCA have come together in one platform and come with a collective voice. I think this needs to be one of the things that we should try across Northeast. That whoever is really in favor of, so we need to come in one platform, build a single platform from which we can push the government, we can push the policymakers to really come up with a required policy in the ground to support these community initiatives or to generate funds or to convince the global community like how important these community initiatives are and how the support that is required by these communities to continue with this work. So we need to get into one platform across from the Northeast to really, if we want to push it at a higher scale, and which is very much required. If we keep working in isolations, we are not going to achieve anything. There will be a point after which community will also start losing interest.
You're basically saying we need a bigger network for the CCA where they can come together and can discuss their issues with respect to the biodiversity. Also, I have another question. Is very in last for 5 years we have been seeing there is a moment going on in Nagaland. I don't know about much about the Arunachal, where we've seen most of the community forests now are converted into a conservation reserve under the Wildlife Protection Act. So, how do you see the implication of the conservation reserves on the
conservation reserve or community reserve?
Community reserve, yeah.
Yeah.
How do you see the implication on the management and on the community?
So basically, if you look at the Wildlife Protection Act, that's where in one of the slides I have mentioned that whatever the policies that is available with us, it's basically trying to ensure the protection of the community rights, not mobilizing community or using the opportunities that we have with the community to achieve a bigger conservation goal. Similarly, if you look at the community reserve section in the Wildlife Protection Act, if you look at the wildlife sanctuary section in the Wildlife Protection Act, it has 14 sections and more than 20 subsections to describe how to have a wildlife sanctuary, how to manage it, what are the penalties that you can have if you are violating certain rules and regulations. Then it is from I think 18 to 34, section 18 to 34. It talks only about how to have a wildlife sanctuary in a particular place. Then the next section with 8 subsections, I think talks about the national park. But if you look at the community reserves part, it is just one section with 3 subsections. So there is a lots of gray area when you talk about community reserve. So basically, I don't think the whole idea of incorporating community reserve in Wildlife Protection Act was to achieve the conservation objective by mobilizing community. It was mostly this objective was communities' rights are a little bit taken care of, their ownerships are taken care of. Not, I don't think it was ever was to achieve any bigger conservation goal, and that's why I don't have much hope with this particular provisions that we have in the community wildlife protection.
Thank you, Pijush.
Thank you so much. We have one question from the chat box again. There's a question from Christy Sylvia. She asked, after CCA is set up, are there months where forests are left to regenerate without disturbance? And do the communities already have this plan in their TEK and ways of managing these areas? So this question is for...
I couldn't get can you speak a little loudly?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
The question is from Christy Sylvia, and it says, after any CCA is set up, are there months where forests are left to regenerate without any disturbances? And do the communities have ways and plans to manage these areas?
Yeah, so no, that nothing such has been so far been put in the management plan or the management strategy which is there. The communities are executing. Regarding the traditional knowledge, yeah, this is one thing that we are working very hard to incorporate in the management strategy, because while we are working with the community, it's also important that whatever the rules and regulations they frame or they are make to follow is something that they are developing at their own from their own understanding and own knowledge, rather than imposing some rules and regulations framed in Delhi or some other capital, and which is a complete alien kind of rules and regulations for them to understand. Even we all work in the wildlife for so many years, but how many of us know that list of all the species in Schedule 1 in the Wildlife Protection Act? So to expect the community that they will be very much comfortable with the provisions of the rules which are framed somewhere else is very, very wrong. So we normally try to use their traditional knowledge systems. We try to fill up the gaps which is there in the traditional management systems with science-based knowledge which are generated during the process. Like we use the GIS for mapping and other things, which is an added advantage for the community to really see the holistic picture of their CC area, where is the forest, how much is the forest, what type of forest, where the degradation is happening. So this helps the community, the use of this technology helps the community to really take decisions. So we normally facilitate in that way.
Thank you, Pijush.
Thank you, Christy.
Okay, thank you, sir, again, and thank you, Christy, for the question. We have one last question, and it is from Dr. Avinash Parita. And the question is, what is your view about Mizoram state regarding CCAs? What is your view about Mizoram state regarding CCAs?
Yeah, I think Mizoram has a huge prospects, because if you look at the amount of forest which is with the community is very high. It is under the Sikh Schedule provision. So I think it can really set an example for in the Northeast, because with such a huge area under community ownerships and with the Sikh Schedule provisions applicable to the states, Mizoram can really set an example for the Northeast.
Hello, Dr. Avinash, I think we cannot hear you clearly right now.
Yeah.
Hello, we still cannot hear you.
I think his mic is off actually. Can I come in, Ben, if you don't mind? Yeah. So before the concluding the session, like Pijush has mentioned about the network of the CCA, I just like to share all the participants FES actually try to bring all the CCs in Nagaland into one platform, which is call it an Nagaland Community Conservation Forum actually. So currently, this forum has almost more than 30 member CCS, and one of the objectives of this forum is to basically to share their own ideas with each other and challenges, and also raise a similar voice for the pro CC in the state actually. I think like Pijush also mentioned, I think this model can be also applicable to the rest of the Northeast India also. And we're also looking to see how we can link up the network in other Northeast India with the CC network actually.
Yeah. You can have a state level platform, then you can make build it onto the regional level platform for the Northeast.
Yeah, so we have actually on the landscape level CCA forum, and then we have a state level CCA forum. And this forum is basically not kind of the pressure group, but basically a peer group where they can come together and share their learning experiences each other actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dr. Avinash, were you saying something? We weren't able to hear you a while back. Hello, we still cannot hear you. I think there's something wrong with your mic, or is he on mute? He's not on mute, right?
It's not on mute.
Okay.
Okay, I think
I think the microphone is not working.
Maybe you can ask him to chat, type in his question.
Okay. Okay. I think he's gesturing that. Yes. Okay. If you have anything further to say, you can leave your message in the chat section. Apart from that, I think that is the end of the question session. We have answered all the questions, and I would like to thank Dr. Pijush for his time and for giving us this wonderful presentation. There are a lot of good comments thanking you and how wonderful the session was, and I think it was really informative. And I believe that everyone here has taken something up from his presentation. And yes, we also had this very interesting discussions through the questions. So before I come to the end, I would like to just thank Dr. Pijush for his time, his presentation. I do hope that in the days to come, we will, work closely and also continue to share our ideas and our work and our experiences with each other so that we can help each other in the field of conservation, especially to do with CCAs. Thank you so much. And I would also like to thank the participants who are here. We thank you for your participation. If your participation was not there, this webinar session would not be successful. And also to the partner organizations like NEPED and NCCF. We thank you for your continued support all the time, and also to the organizers, FES, my colleagues. I would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to all of you for your efforts and all the preparations for this webinar. So I think my time here is done, but before I go, I would like to say that we have another webinar that is scheduled for 25th of August at 4 p.m. at the same time, and this will be on Hornbill Conservation in Northeast India by Dr. Aparajita Datta. So who is a senior scientist in NCF. So I think this will also be a very interesting webinar session that I look forward to, and also I hope that your participation will also be there. We will be circulating the information, further information on the pamphlet